Invasion begins. It was a day that would live in infamy. The day the Zorgex Empire launched its surprise attack on Earth. The first indication of the impending horror came when a massive spacecraft, easily 10 times larger than anything Earth Force had in its arsenal, materialized on the outskirts of the solar system. It was soon joined by a flotilla of smaller but no less intimidating warships, their sleek, predatory profiles screaming hostile intent. In the span of a heartbeat, alarms blared across the blue planet and its orbital outposts. Earth's meager defenses mobilized to meet the threat, but it was already too late. The Zorgax were upon them. Leading the charge was none other than Queen Vaxa herself, the immortal sovereign of the Zorgax Empire. Cold, brilliant, and ruthlessly efficient, Vaxa had carved a bloody swath across the galaxy, subsuming countless worlds into her ever-expanding realm. And now her sights were set on Earth. The reasons for the invasion were shrouded in mystery. Humanity had no prior contact with the Zorgax, no warning of their coming. Some speculated the aliens were after Earth's resources. Others feared the Zorgax simply craved conquest. But only Queen Vaxa knew the truth. This was personal. From her vantage point aboard the colossal flagship at the heart of the Zorgax fleet, Vaxa watched dispassionately as her forces rained destruction upon Earth's orbital stations. The human defenders fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outmatched, their weapons and shields failing before the might of superior Zorgax technology. Amid this chaos, one human drew Vaxa's particular attention. A pilot, jinking and weaving his tiny fighter through the apocalyptic space battle with preternatural skill and daring. Time and again, the lone craft slipped past Vaxa's defenses, strafing her warships with pinpoint attacks. Vaxa's eyes narrowed as she watched the pilot's audacious maneuvers. She recognized the all-too-human brilliance and tenacity, and it made her synthetic blood boil. This one would need to be dealt with, personally. As if sensing her gaze, the fighter peeled away from the engagement and aimed itself toward the core of the Zorgax formation. Toward Vaxa's flagship, the pilot, Vaxa knew, could be none other than Commander Jace Riker, the pride of Earth's Star Command. Young, brash, and infuriatingly clever, Riker had been a thorn in the Empire's side for years. Vaxa allowed herself a small, cold smile. Perhaps this farce of an invasion would prove useful after all. When the mighty Commander Riker was nothing more than a cloud of frozen gore smeared across her view screens, all of Earth would understand the futility of resistance. And then, at long last, humanity would be hers to crush beneath her endless legions. The anticipation was electric. The Queen's honor guard shifted nervously around her, put on edge by her uncharacteristic display of emotion. Vaxa ignored them, her attention fixated on the lone fighter streaking toward certain doom. "Come then, little human," she whispered to herself, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Let us dance." And with those words, the fate of two civilizations collided. As Commander Jace Riker hurtled headlong into the jaws of the Zorgax war machine, and the watchful gaze of the alien queen, who yearned for Earth's destruction above all else. The Queen's Gambit. Commander Jace Riker gritted his teeth as his fighter shuddered under another near miss. The Zorgax flagship loomed before him, a massive nightmare fortress bristling with enough firepower to reduce continents to ash. It was, Jace reflected grimly, probably the single most foolhardy thing he'd ever done. And given his track record, that was saying something. The young commander had always been known for his unorthodox tactics and devil-may-care bravado. But this, a lone one-man assault on the crown jewel of the Zorgax war fleet, was audacious even for him. His superiors had called it suicidal. Jace preferred to think of it as daring. If he could just get close enough to the flagship's command deck, he might be able to take out Queen Vaxa herself, cut the head off the serpent, as it were. It was a long shot, but with Earth's orbital defenses crumbling by the second, long shots were all humanity had left. Jace jinked and wove, pushing his reaction times to the limit as he dodged the hail of incoming fire. The Zorgak's point defenses were ferocious, a web of searing energy beams and seeker drones that promised swift annihilation to the unwary. But Jace was anything but unwary. With preternatural focus and lightning reflexes, he threaded his ship through the impossibly narrow gaps in the alien barrage, eking out hair's-breadth turns and rolls that would have liquefied the organs of a lesser pilot. Closer and closer he came, until the flagship's kilometers-long hull filled his cockpit's canopy. Just a little further. That was when everything went wrong. A blast of searing blue-white light erupted from the Zorgak ship, engulfing Jace's fighter in an inferno of exotic particles. The craft's shields flared and died instantly, its hull slagging and deforming under the onslaught. Consoles sparked and emergency klaxons blared as the crippled bird began to tumble helplessly. Through the mayhem, Jace glimpsed the source of the attack, a huge, spinal-mounted particle cannon, still glowing with residual heat. The weapon was swiveling to track his stricken vessel, preparing to finish the job. In that frozen instant, Jace understood two things with crystalline clarity. First, that he had severely underestimated the flagship's defensive capabilities, and second, that he was about to die. Time seemed to dilate as Jace watched the cannon's muzzle flare with building energy. His hands danced over the controls, trying to will some faint flicker of life back into the ship's fused circuitry. But it was no use. He was dead in space, a sitting duck. Jace's mind flickered to his friends, his family, to all the people back on Earth who were counting on him. He'd failed them. And now, they would all burn, and it would be his fault. The particle beam lanced out, blindingly radiant. Jace closed his eyes, bracing for the end, and gasped as his fighter lurched sickeningly to one side, the cockpit filling with the stink of roasting insulation. Impossibly, he was still alive. The particle beam had missed him by meters, deflected at the last instant by the timely intervention of 3 Earth Force fighters, arriving in a blaze of guns and glory. Jace's wingmates, disobeying orders to come to his aid. "You just had to hog all the fun, Rikers," crackled a familiar voice over the radio. Jace's best friend and wing commander, Mikhail Petrov. "Leave some for the rest of us next time." Jace laughed, giddy with adrenaline and relief. "I owe you one, Misha. More than one, I'd say," came the wry response. "Now let's get you out of there." As his friends moved to cover his limping fighter's retreat, Jace spared a glance back at the flagship. For an instant, he fancied he could feel Queen Vax's gaze upon him, cold and evaluating. This round had gone to her, but the fight was far from over. Jace set his jaw in a determined line. One way or another, he vowed, the alien queen would pay for her crimes against humanity, even if he had to tear her ship apart bolt by bolt with his bare hands. The battle for Earth had only just begun. An unlikely rescue. Pain. That was the first thing Queen Vaxa became aware of as she swam up from the depths of unconsciousness, blinding, searing pain radiating from her abdomen. The second thing was the face looming over her, a human face, etched with concern and streaked with sweat and grime. Commander Jace Riker. Memories came flooding back. The battle turned against them. Boarding pods striking the flagship's hull. Zorgak's defenders fighting desperately as Earth Force commandos rampaged through the ship. And then the explosion, blasting through Vax's elite guard in a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. She remembered a white-hot lance in her side, the feeling of weightlessness as the deck rushed up to meet her. Vaxa tried to move, to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. She felt strangely disconnected, her mind fogged and distant. Poison, some analytical part of her brain offered. The human's primitive weapons must have been laced with some crude toxin. She focused her eyes with an effort, glaring up at the human commander. If she was to die, she would do so with dignity, not mooling and helpless before this ape. But to her surprise, Riker wasn't gloating. He was hunched over her, hands moving with swift purpose. Vaxa felt pressure on her wound, the prick of a needle in her neck. The pain receded fractionally, her mind clearing. Why? She managed to rasp, shock coloring her voice. This made no sense. She was his enemy, the architect of his species' suffering. He should be rejoicing at her downfall, not helping. Riker's eyes met hers, stormy gray and unreadable. I don't know, he admitted after a long moment. Maybe because I'm not like you. Before Vaxa could parse the meaning behind those cryptic words, the human was rising, slinging his pulse rifle back over his shoulder. In a single smooth motion, he scooped the injured queen up into his arms, as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Vaxa gasped at the sudden movement, at the indignity of it. She was the immortal sovereign, the unquestioned ruler of 1,000 star systems, to be carried like a child, and by a human no less. But she was in no position to protest. The poison still sapped her strength, and blood loss was taking its toll. As much as it galled her to admit it, she was completely at Riker's mercy. The human set off at a brisk pace, navigating the battle-scarred corridors of the flagship with a confidence that spoke of extensive training and experience. All around, the noises of pitched combat echoed. The zap of energy weapons, the clatter of armored feet, the harsh cries of the wounded and dying. Vaxa couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for these Earth warriors. Against all odds, they had brought the fight to the very heart of her ship, carving a path of destruction through her finest troops. It should have been impossible. But then, she was beginning to suspect that impossible was a word these humans did not comprehend. As if summoned by her thoughts, a fire team of Zorgak soldiers rounded the corner ahead, insectoid faces contorting in shock as they registered the sight of their queen in the arms of the enemy. They raised their weapons to fire, and fell as a hail of searing orange bolts tore into them from behind. More Earth Force troopers appearing from a side passage to flank the defenders. At their head strode a giant bear of a man, built like a moving mountain. Cutting it a bit close there, Misha, Riker called out, his tone light despite the grim situation. The big man, Mikhail, Vaxa surmised, shrugged his armored shoulders. You looked like you had it under control. His gaze fell on the wounded queen, and his eyes widened. Is that Queen Vaxa herself? Riker confirmed. She's injured. I'm getting her to the infirmary. Mikhail's face clouded with confusion. The infirmary? But why would you? Riker cut him off with a sharp look. There's no time. Just trust me on this, Misha. Please. The two men locked gazes for a long, tense moment. An unspoken conversation seemed to pass between them. Finally, Mikhail gave a curt nod. I hope you know what you're doing, Jace. I'll hold the line here. Get moving. With a grateful nod, Riker set off once more, his unlikely charge still cradled close. Vaxa watched the byplay in silent fascination, trying to comprehend the bond of loyalty and friendship that could inspire such trust between warriors. It was a foreign concept to the Zorgaks, who ruled through fear and domination. Perhaps she mused through the haze of pain and confusion. There was more to these humans than she had previously allowed. An explosion somewhere deep within the ship rocked the deck, nearly causing Riker to stumble. Vaxa gritted her teeth against a wave of fresh agony, feeling her consciousness begin to fray at the edges. As darkness rose up to claim her once more, the alien queen's last coherent thought was one of absurd, hopeless irony. The mighty Vaxa, scourge of 1,000 worlds, now depending for her very life on the mercy of a lowly human. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor indeed. Uneasy alliance. Commander Jace Riker paced the length of the small, sterile room, his agitation evident in every taut line of his body. 1,000 competing thoughts and emotions warred within him, all centered around the unconscious figure lying on the medical bed before him. Queen Vaxa, ruler of the Zorgaks, the alien despot who had brought death and ruin to countless worlds across the galaxy, who, even now, was directing the siege of Earth, Jace's homeworld. By all rights, Jace should hate her. Part of him did. But another part, The part that had driven him to save her life back on the flagship felt only confusion and a strange, reluctant fascination. Rescuing Vaxa had been an act of pure instinct. In the heat of battle, confronted with a wounded, helpless foe, Jace had simply reacted, his deeply ingrained sense of honor and mercy overriding all other considerations. It was what separated him, what separated humanity, from the ruthless, pitiless Zorgax. Or so Jace had always believed. But now, watching the slow, even rise and fall of Vax's chest beneath the medical scanner, he found himself wondering if perhaps the lines were not so clear-cut. If there might be more to this alien queen and her people than he had assumed. A soft groan from the bed jolted Jace from his troubled musings. Vaxa was stirring, her large, liquid black eyes fluttering open. They widened as they too, in her surroundings, then narrowed as they settled on Jace. You. The word was a rasp, laced with pain and confusion. Why have you brought me here? What do you want from me? Jace met her gaze steadily, trying to project a calm he did not feel. You were wounded. I'd brought you here to recover. Vaxa struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her injury. I am your enemy, your prisoner. You should have let me die. I couldn't do that. Why not? There was genuine bewilderment in the question. Jace hesitated, trying to find the words. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I believe that even in war, there must be honor and mercy, even for an enemy. Vaxa stared at him as if he had grown a second head. You are a fool, human, she said at last, but there was no heat in the words. If anything, she sounded almost thoughtful. Mercy is weakness. Honor is an illusion. The only truth is power, and the will to wield it. You really believe that, don't you? Jace mused. Is that why you attacked us? For power? Vax's gaze turned distant. I attacked you because it is what I was made to do. I am the Zorgax queen. Conquest is my purpose, my only reason for being. Something in her tone gave Jace pause. You were made? What do you mean? Vaxa seemed to realize she had said too much. Her expression shuddered, becoming unreadable. It does not matter. You would not understand. Try me, Jace challenged. I think there's a lot about you, about your people, that I don't understand, but unwilling to learn. For a long, charged moment, human and alien regarded each other in silence, a strange, fragile connection sparking between them. Then Vaxa looked away. You should go, she said quietly. Your people will be looking for you. And I need to rest. Jace wanted to argue, to press further, but he recognized the dismissal for what it was. With a sigh, he turned toward the door, just as a shuddering boom rocked the ship, throwing them both off balance. Alarms blared and red emergency lights strobed dizzyingly. Jace's cum badge crackled to life, Michael's voice taut with urgency. Jace, we've got a problem. The extremist faction. They've seized control of the war core. They're threatening to destroy the ship. Jace's blood ran cold. The extremists, the most fanatical and xenophobic elements of Zorgax society, who viewed any dealing with aliens as treason. Somehow, they'd infiltrated this mission. And now, he met Vax's gaze, saw his own dawning horror mirrored there. In that instant, a perfect, terrible understanding passed between them. They had just run out of time. Race against time. Queen Vaxa gritted her teeth as another explosion vibrated the deck plates beneath her feet. Beside her, Commander Jace Riker cursed softly, his eyes intent on the readouts scrolling across his handheld scanner. The fanatics have locked down the engineering section, he reported tersely. They're bypassing the failsafes on the warp core. If they succeed, he didn't need to finish. Vaxa knew all too well the destructive potential of an overloading warp core. It would vaporize the ship, and everyone on it, including them. Injured and exhausted, weaponless, and cut off from her forces, Vaxa knew she should have been afraid. And yet, all she could muster was a sort of grim, fatalistic determination. If this was to be her end, so be it. At least she would meet it on her feet. But Riker was different. He burned with a fierce, stubborn resolve, a refusal to accept defeat even in the face of impossible odds. It was there in the set of his jaw, the coiled tension in his powerful frame. He would fight to his last breath to save his ship, his crew, just as he had fought to save her. The realization hit Vaxa like a plasma bolt. This human, this enemy, had risked everything, his mission, his life, perhaps even the fate of his entire species, to show her compassion, to treat her with a basic decency she had never once extended to those under her heel. It defied understanding. It challenged everything she had ever been taught about the inherent superiority of the Zorgax, about the unworthiness of lesser beings. Could she have been so wrong? Could they all have been? A particularly violent tremor nearly threw her off balance, jolting her out of her crisis of conscience. Riker caught her arm, steadying her with a gentleness that belied his soldiers' calluses. "Easy," he murmured. "We're almost there." Indeed, the corridor ahead opened up into the cavernous expanse of main engineering. The ship's warp core dominated the center of the room, a pulsing column of blinding blue-white energy. It was, Vaxa noted with rising dread, fluctuating erratically, arcs of crackling plasma lashing from its containment field. At its base, a cluster of Zorgax soldiers worked feverishly at the control panels, overseen by a single tall figure in ornate battle armor. Vaxa's eyes widened in shocked recognition. "Kirik," she breathed. "But what is he doing here?" Riker glanced at her sharply. "You know him. He leads the Trueborn, a Zorgax purist movement. They believe contact with outsiders weakens us, that the Empire must remain isolated to stay strong." She shook her head. "I always dismissed them as fanatics. I never dreamed they would dare move against me openly." "Looks like we both misjudged the situation." Riker's mouth set in a grim line. "But it doesn't change what we have to do. We need to." But before he could finish, a strident klaxon split the air. On the engineering deck below, Kirik looked up, his eyes meeting Vaxa's across the expanse. "Ah, Your Majesty." His voice was mocking. Just in time to witness the rebirth of the Zorgax Empire, an empire purged of the taint of alien influence. He turned back to the control panel. "Initiate final sequence." "No." Riker brought his rifle up, sighting Kirik's unprotected head, but it was too late. With a blinding flash and a deafening roar, the warp core exploded. Instinctively, Vaxa tackled Riker, bearing them both to the ground as a wave of blistering heat and searing light washed over them. Shards of metal pinged off her back, drawing blood, but she hardly noticed. All her focus was on shielding the human beneath her. Gradually, the roar subsided to a dull ringing in her ears. Vaxa raised her head carefully, blinking spots from her eyes. Where the warp core had been was now a twisted mass of fused metal and flickering fires. Of Kirik and his followers, there was no sign. You saved me." Riker's voice was awed as she rolled off him, allowing him to sit up. "Why?" Vaxa met his gaze, seeing her own wonder reflected back at her. I don't know," she admitted softly. Perhaps it was the right thing to do." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, human and Zorgax, a profound understanding blossoming between them. Then Riker touched his comm badge. "Riker to bridge. The renegade threat is neutralized. But we have a problem. The warp core is gone. We're dead in space." "Understood." Michael's voice came back, heavy with relief and concern. "What now?" Riker looked to Vaxa, a question in his eyes. She hesitated only a moment before nodding decisively. "Now," she said, her voice ringing with a new resolve. "We end this. Together. A new beginning." Commander Jace Riker stood on the bridge of the Zorgax flagship, watching the glowing curve of Earth's horizon fill the view screen. It looked impossibly fragile from up here, a blue-green marble swathed in wisps of white cloud. Hard to believe that a world so beautiful could have come so close to total annihilation. At the center of the bridge, Queen Vaxa cut an imposing figure, still regal and commanding despite the bandage wound at her side. She leaned heavily on the command console, but her voice was clear and strong as she addressed her crew. And so, in light of recent events, I am ordering an immediate ceasefire on all fronts. The Zorgax Empire will stand down its forces and enter into negotiations for a lasting peace with the United Earth government. A few of the bridge officers exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared voice dissent. The failed extremist coup had shaken Zorgax society to its core, revealing deep fractures and fault lines that could no longer be ignored. Change was coming to the Empire, whether they liked it or not. Vaxa ended the ship-wide broadcast with a weary sigh, slumping slightly as the screen went dark. Jace crossed to her in quick strides, concern etched across his face. "Are you all right?" She waved off his worry with an impatient hand. "I'll live." Her gaze softened fractionally as it met his. "Thanks to you." Jace ducked his head, suddenly self-conscious. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No." Vaxa shook her head. "What you did, sparing the life of an enemy, it was extraordinary. You challenged everything I thought I knew about your species, about my own." She turned to face him fully, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I have spent my entire life conquest and subjugation. I thought it was my purpose, my destiny. But now..." She trailed off, seemingly at a loss. Jace felt a sudden surge of empathy for this proud, fierce creature. How lost she must feel, how adrift, to have the foundations of her existence so utterly upended. Tentatively, he reached out to lay a comforting hand on her shoulder. To his surprise, she didn't shrug it off. "I know it's not easy," he said softly, "to question everything you've ever believed. But growth rarely is. What matters is that you're trying, that you're choosing a different path." Vaxa was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was hushed, almost wondering. "I thought I was alone," she murmured. "The last of my kind. A clone, grown in a lab to be the perfect conqueror. But you make me feel like I could be something more. Like I have a choice." Jace's heart ached at the loneliness, the quiet desperation in her words. How isolating it must have been to be shaped for a single, merciless purpose, never knowing friendship or kindness, or... Vaxa straightened abruptly, her mask of composure slipping back into place. But there was a new light in her eyes when they met Jace's, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "I want you to be there," she said firmly. "At the negotiations, I need someone I can trust, someone who understands both our worlds. Someone who can help me build a bridge instead of a battleground." Jace blinked, taken aback by the magnitude of what she was offering. A chance to forge a real, lasting peace between their species. An opportunity to heal the wounds of war and foster understanding in its place. It was, he realized with a sudden, dizzying clarity, exactly what he had been fighting for all along. A chance to make a difference. To build a better future. He smiled, feeling the weight of old hatreds and fears lift from his shoulders like a physical thing. In its place, a new emotion bloomed, fragile and precious and full of promise. Hope. "I would be honored," he said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Together, side by side, the human soldier and the alien queen looked out at the stars and dared to dream of a different tomorrow. One where the endless cycle of violence and vengeance might finally be broken. Where their people, and all people, could walk forward into the light of a new beginning. It would not be an easy road. There would be hardships and setbacks, old resentments, and new challenges to overcome. But for now, for this one perfect, shining moment, anything seemed possible. And that was enough. In summary, this 6-part story tells a classic HFY-style tale of how compassion, understanding, and the indomitable human spirit can triumph over even the most implacable of alien threats. By choosing mercy and seeing the potential for change in his enemy, Commander Jace Riker not only saves Queen Vaxa's life, but also sets in motion a profound transformation in the Zorgex leader. Through their unlikely bond and alliance, Jace and Vaxa come to challenge the prejudices and preconceptions that have driven their peoples to war. In each other, they find a mirror held up to their own beliefs, forcing them to question the dogmas they have long held as absolute truths. Vaxa's journey from merciless conqueror to a more thoughtful, introspective leader seeking peace is particularly poignant. Her realization that she has a choice, that her life can be more than an endless cycle of subjugation and conquest, speaks to the power of the human example to inspire change and growth. Jace, meanwhile, embodies the best of human virtues: courage, compassion, honor, and an unyielding commitment to a higher ideal. His willingness to see the potential for good in an enemy, to extend mercy and understanding even in the heat of battle, ultimately proves the key to ending the conflict and forging a new path forward. Their story is a testament to the transformative power of connection and empathy across even the widest of divides. It suggests that even in the darkest of times, in the face of the most intractable of conflicts, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow, if we have the courage to reach for it. While the road ahead for both humanity and the Zorgax is sure to be a difficult one, fraught with challenges and complications, the ending of the tale leaves us with a sense of optimism. In coming together, in choosing dialogue and diplomacy over destruction, Jace and Vaxa have lit a spark of hope that, if nurtured, could grow to illuminate a new era of peace and cooperation between the stars. It is a powerful message, and one that resonates at the core of the HFY genre. That in the end, it is not our technology or our firepower that makes us strong, but our unquenchable spirit, our ability to dream and to strive, and to reach out across the darkness of the void in friendship and fellowship. In Jace and Vaxa's story, in the journey from bitter enmity to hard-won understanding and alliance, we see that spirit writ large. We see proof that even in the vastness of space, amid the clash of civilizations and the tumult of war, there is always room for compassion, for connection, for growth and change. And that, ultimately, is the greatest victory of all.